Director Walter Hill is one of the staple filmmakers of the 80s and 90s, having made some of the most memorable action films of that era and defining a mashup genre style that turned many of his films into modern-day westerns. Starting out as a screenwriter in the 70s, Hill would work with Sam Peckinpah in 1972's The Getaway with Steve McQueen, and would later graduate to directing, starting with Hard Times starring Charles Bronson, before moving on to films like The Driver with Ryan O'Neal, the cult classic The Warriors, and the bloody western The Long Riders. Hill would then go on to further define his stylistic macho swagger while refining the buddy cop formula with films like 48 Hours, Another 48 Hours, and Red Heat, while dabbling in the music genre with films like Crossroads and Streets of Fire. His hard-nosed, in-your-face characters are often coupled with kinetic, stylish action, complete with his signature tropes of men crashing through glass, rapid-fire gunshots with bombastic sound effects, and quick-cut editing frequently layered under a bed of music score by frequent collaborator Ry Cooder. One of the most influential filmmakers and storytellers in Hollywood, Hill is back with a new film, the Western Dead for a Dollar, starring Christoph Waltz, Willem Dafoe, and Rachel Brosnahan. In this special interview edition of The Beard the Bald, Hill talks about his new film while taking a trip back through his filmography, and even discusses the reasons behind his signature gunshots throughout his films, as well as clearing up his involvement in the Alien franchise and more.
I never killed nobody that wasn't trying to kill me.
Walk away from that gun!
Most likely you're a dead man.
I am willing to offer you $2,000 to bring Rachel back.
He intends to kill me. Are you getting nervous?
I don't like being used. To see how good you really are.
It is an honor to talk to you today. I am a huge fan. I've grown up with your films, so it is awesome to talk to you today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So let's launch into Dead for a Dollar first and foremost. I just watched it this morning. It felt like kind of a slow burn Western tale, like with, some A-list stars. It's got kind of that old fashioned Western vibe going for it. I'm curious from you, what is the appeal to going back to the Western genre? Because it's a well you've gone back to many times, and you continue to do so.
Well, I always think the Westerns, so many of the good ones have been done with a kind of seemingly simple elegance on the surface that kind of overlays, serious ethical, moral concerns. I wasn't so concerned about doing something really flashy on this thing. I wanted to tell a modulated story about some interesting people caught up in an interesting situation that comes to I wouldn't call it a tragic ending, but there's a degree of melancholy to the ending. And but I think it's a good story. It's one that gives you something to talk about.
You've got Willem Dafoe, you've got Christoph Waltz, you got Rachel Brosnahan, you got a bunch of other a great supporting cast. What was it like, or how did the casting come about to get Dafoe and Waltz? And what got you excited about having those guys together?
Well, the way it all started, I was doing some reading about history of outlawry in Oklahoma, and I came across the name of a man named Chris Madsen. Chris Madsen was a real person who was born in Denmark, fought as a very young man in the Danish army in the Prussian War. He then left that and signed up for the French Foreign Legion, did a tour of duty in Africa, and then took a boat to America, went west, joined the Army, was an Army scout, drifted out of the Army and became a lawman and a bounty man. And I thought, this would be an interesting way in for a character, way in, not to have the traditional Anglo, many generational American, but to do the bounty man as an immigrant.
Right.
First, because immigrants were very common in
Sure.
the West in that period of our history. And so then I began to fashion a story around that idea of a character. I wanted something, well, I was friends, still am, friends with Christoph Waltz. And I called Christoph and I said, I think I got something you might be interested in. And he read it, I think within a day, he called me back and said he'd like to do it. And I wrote the Joe Cribbins character for Willem. Willem and I have been trying to work with each other for about 40 years now.
Wow.
I worked together again because we've been very friendly. We've been quite friendly ever since we did Streets of Fire together.
Yeah.
And this is a tricky business that whatever intentions you have, trying to make things work out on other people's schedules, your own schedules, time, circumstance, projects. And sometimes, even with the best of intentions, it's hard to. But we finally got a chance on this one. I sent Willem the script. He said, yeah, but he didn't want anybody. I don't want anybody else to play it. So, and Rachel came in. We were talking to a lot of different people, and Rachel, we sent the casting director, Lorraine Middleton. She said, I'd like to send it to Rachel Brosnahan. And I said, God, you think we could get her? I thought she was in that, because I'd seen her work.
Yeah.
I thought she was, I said, if you were running out of time, we got to get a fast answer. And she reads very quick. She'll give us a fast answer. And I think it was 2 days later after we sent it to her, Lorraine called me and said, Rachel would like to talk to you. She likes it. And here's her number. And so Rachel and I talked. She was in New York shooting. And we talked. She agreed to do the movie on her time off from the show and came to Santa Fe and then did a wonderful job.
And that was that. So
well, it's always easier retelling, but
yeah. So, I mean, this is your latest work. I want to take a trip back with you through some of your older films, if you'll indulge me. I began my film education, in my early years, and frequently went by director, just trying to soak in everybody's films. And your filmography is absolutely one of the ones I covered. Went through everything, and you've contributed significantly to the craft of filmmaking, and especially the action genre. I've frequently looked to your films, you start saying, hey, we were the top action directors. Your name is frequently in there. So I wanted to ask you, just kind of bring up one film we already mentioned. Streets of Fire is a movie that I grew up watching over and over again as a kid. I still go back and watch it. And it was one of my favorite films growing up, but it wasn't like a huge box office smash, yet it found its way to me. And it was something that I grew up with just frequently to this day. So I'm curious for you, what are your thoughts on Streets of Fire today? You're so far away from it now that it's out into the world. What are your thoughts on Streets of Fire?
Well, it's a funny thing. I get in the last, I'd say 5-10 years, maybe, I get asked about it a lot now.
Yeah.
And it seems to have caught on in some underground way. I mean, years and years went by, nobody ever even mentioned it to me. And what did I feel about? Well, I really wanted to do a musical. And I thought this was about as close as I could get to do a musical. And I'd mix it with the action genre to see if I could pull that off. The movie did not do well domestically. It did pretty well. It did very well in Europe. Did not do well in the UK, but it did very well in Europe, and it did very, very well in Japan.
Yeah.
So it just barely covered its cost. I always thought that I thought the movie took a lot of chances. It was a different.
Oh, yeah.
It was certainly different, but I was proud of it. I thought what we were trying to do with it, we had pretty well got it down. Whether, like you make these things and you make stories that you're interested in. And I mean, if you're not a good audience, who the hell is going to be? You got to start with yourself. And then you hope that somebody else is interested and wants to see it. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And, it's the old thing about if we all knew what the secret was to make hits, we'd all just make hits. But it doesn't work that way. You make the same kind of commitments on those that work and those that don't. Although, look, I think there's. We used to define my old partner, David Geiler, always said there were dogs and there were bombs. A bomb was a movie that was a commercial failure. A dog was a movie that was just a lousy movie. And the thing to be avoided was a dog bomb. You could make a good movie and it would bomb. That happens.
Sure.
You just don't catch the wave. You can make a dog and actually have it make some money. That happens too. But what you don't want is the dog bomb.
Yeah.
And I'm wildly prejudiced, but I don't think any of my movies are dogs. But but some of them probably fall into the category of bombs. So, as I say, it's just a kind of the same movie you feel 2 years before, 2 years later might have had a very different fate.
Yeah.
But you have to, I always say, catch the wave. And where the wave's going to break, pretty hard to predict.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, another movie of yours that is a movie that I just adore is Johnny Handsome. I think Johnny Handsome is just, it's a crime classic. I love it. I love the Ry Cooder score. I love everything about that movie. It's just, it's awesome. I try to get everybody I run into to watch that amidst other ones. But I have kind of a technical question for you that I've always been curious about, which is for all of your films, especially movies like Johnny Handsome, Red Heat, Trespass, Another 48 Hours, Last Man Standing, you have a very distinct gunshot sound that comes from all the guns that are fired in your movies. It's unlike any other filmmaker out there. It's a distinction that you have. And you've probably explained this before to millions of other people, but I have not found that explanation. I would love to know what it is that shapes that for you. What tools, what's the trick? What is it that creates the Walter Hill like gunshot aesthetic? Because it's so unique. It's so very you.
I think the biggest thing is, number one, you have sort of different people are firing different guns, and they each have to have a unique sound because otherwise you're just going to get wall-to-wall noise.
Right.
And to get through to the audience, it's a dangerous and terrible thing when somebody points a gun at somebody and fires, and you want the audience to feel that. I used to say on the sets that the jokes are funny, but the bullets are real. That's the way we're telling these stories. That's a aesthetic that no longer really exists. The new action film, the bullets aren't real. I mean, they get knocked down, they get up, and they fight again. And, it's a different aesthetic, and the audiences seem to love that. It's not to my taste, but But audiences choose for themselves. I like a full side. I tell the mixers, and we work on it again after with the sound editors, got specific guns and sounds for those specific guns. I like the shots to be round, what I call round, and let's not be afraid to make them pretty loud.
Sure.
Because that jolts the audience.
Well, it feels like it gives them kind of a personality, as you were saying. Like I think of like Cherry Gans in Another 48 Hours, that the 50 cal that he's shooting, the Desert Eagle, it's just got kind of it's got like a pling to it, it's a very distinct sound. And you feel that with each and every character. I've always just found that such a fascinating thing. I've always been curious why more filmmakers don't do that. And I always felt like it was a Walter Hill thing. And it felt like, man, why you're not, whenever I hear a bad sound mix for those, like it always kind of, it's disrupting, I think, to the story. I think it takes away from characters.
It takes away. Yes, I full well agree. I really Paul, I can't speak about other movies, other people's movies, but
right.
I just think you have to take the time and you have to care.
Yeah.
And you don't just say gunshots are gunshots.
Yeah.
They can be, in a sense, like the human voice. Everybody sounds different. Everybody speaks a little differently. You have to apply that kind of care to the moment.
So I wanted to bring up another question about a franchise that you've long been linked to and been a part of tremendously, which is the Alien franchise. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the future of that, like where it can go. I know they're making a TV show now.
Let me don't be misapprehended. I have had nothing to do with the Alien franchise since the third one.
Oh, okay. They just missed you as producer then.
Yes, my partner and I, who's recently deceased, David Geiler and I, got into a series of arguments with the parent company, 20th Century Fox. And so it was arranged to have what was politely called a divorce. And we retained some ownership, and they insisted that our names still be used on the franchise. But I was quite willing to give that up. So there's a bit of confusion that all the films since the third one have David's name and my name on them, but we had nothing to do with the scripts or the shooting or the casting or anything. I haven't even seen a lot of them.
Well, now we'll put that confusion to rest.
Okay.
Yeah. So you haven't seen them, so you're not,
Well, I'm very proud of my association with the first three.
Sure.
I think they obviously work very well with the world audience, and I think they're not just simply successful commercial movies, but I think they're very good films.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Aliens is, I love the first one. The third one is a little mixed bag for me. I think it's a beautiful film, but the second one I think it's just one of the best sci-fi movies and action movies ever made. I think it's amazing. I love it. So I guess the last question I'll bring your way. I'm not quite sure where we are on time. But you, man, I feel like I could just talk to you all day. I have so many questions for so many movies. You are part of really leading the charge in the action genre. I liken you to, in the same breath with, other action filmmakers like John McTiernan, Tony Scott, all these guys, Sam Peckinpah, all these guys that really just kind of like laid this foundation. What to you is the central ingredient or ingredients to making a great action film?
Character. You've got to have a character that the audience, what's the old cliche, identifies with, roots for, or is interested in. They don't always have to be nice people,
right?
But there has to be a degree of fascination around that person. And then you must stay within the character that's given. You must stay within the premise. You want it to surprise people and have story turns and that, but at the same time, you can't get outside your basic premise. I mean, for instance, in the movie you just saw, Max Nordland, Christoph Waltz character, if in the final action sequence he was jumping from building to building, that would be out of character with who we've established in the
right.
And so it was in Dead for a Dollar, it is a gunfight at the end that tries to stay within the physical possibilities of the characters that you have created.
Right.
I've created.
Yeah.
So that's about as good as I can do, Paul.
I mean,
a lot of it's just instinct and your sense of what's appropriate.
Right.
And
well, I just, for me, I consider you a master of that craft. So for me, anything that I can glean from that, I just, I view that as tremendous insight. So, well,
you're very kind, and I do appreciate that.
Well, I will continue to spread that word, sir, because that is the truth.
Tell everybody you know.
I got to be honest. I love sharing your films. Like when I find out people haven't seen it, like, you haven't seen Johnny Handsome? Oh my God. You haven't seen Streets of Fire? Trespass is another one that, oh my God, I love Trespass. Like there's just so many. And I was going back and looking at it. I was like, oh my God, Crossroads, like all these movies that you've done, especially. And I gravitated to so many as a kid. It baffles me sometimes, like, man, I'm a Walter Hill fan and then some. You look back on those films and I still revisit them today. So it's always fun to pass on your work, sir.
Well, thanks, Paul. And, listen, it's fun to still be here. So
yeah, man, please keep making movies. Please just keep going. We'll keep watching. Thanks, Walter. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks, sir. All right, and that's it for my discussion with Walter Hill. Truly a highlight for me as someone that has grown up loving his work and revisiting his films frequently throughout the years. If you haven't taken the plunge, I highly recommend it. Hill has made some of, bar none, the best action movies of the 80s and 90s, and there's plenty to choose from. If you're wondering where to start, I'd highly recommend Southern Comfort with Keith Carradine and Powers Booth, or 48 Hours with Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy. It's kind of one of his most well-known films. The Long Riders is another great start, as it's Hill very much in his kind of peck and paw stage, a lot of slow motion action, some pretty bloody action as well, which really didn't perpetuate his films throughout. Extreme Prejudice with Nick Nolte and Booth is also an amazing film, serving very much as kind of a modern remake of The Wild Bunch. It's got some excellent shootouts, and I was surprised on a recent rewatch to see how many stars are in that movie, from Tiny Zeus Lister. I mean, you trust me, you will see when you watch it. You're like, oh, that guy. It's like, and you're like, holy shit. So, anyways, Extreme Prejudice, great movie. My favorite Hill films are Johnny Handsome and Streets of Fire, hands down. I love tons of his other films, but those two are my standouts. Johnny Handsome is just a badass crime film with some excellent characters, phenomenal ending shootout, and a great pulse pounding score by Ry Cooder. I just love it. Streets of Fire is an absolute blast. It's an experimental action musical hybrid. There's not musical numbers, it just has music in it, so it's kind of a musical, but there's no it's not Michael Paré breaking into like Song and Dance or anything, but Diane Lane for sure, but within context of the film. But it's very much, the music is very much a part of the film, and it is just brimming with like the kind of mashup style, almost an alternate reality, and the characters are just cool, man. They're just cool characters. Willem Dafoe is a great villain. It also has Rick Moranis and Amy Madigan, and they are top notch. It is a wild, fun ride. So Streets of Fire, highly recommend if you've not seen it. Red Heat, another 48 Hours, Trespass, and Last Man Standing are all excellent Hill films as well. Without a doubt, the last great films that he's done, with everything else in his resume post 2000s being somewhat low rent, kind of without the energy and of his previous work, including Dead for a Dollar, sadly. Still, for a filmmaker that has endured throughout decades of Hollywood's ever-changing landscape, it's still great to see a legend at work, who has more than earned his place as one of the most influential and excellent action and genre filmmakers of all time. And he's produced a legendary filmography. So give Hill a look if you haven't already. It should be part of your film education, in my opinion. I promise you'll find some gems that you'll come to love and revisit frequently. So that's it for this special edition of The Beard and the Bald, and will also be the final episode of the podcast series for the time being. I will be continuing my own podcast in the coming weeks, which will be a new format, but with similar topics and focus on more interviews like this one with Hill, as well as a rotating format of guests and guest hosts to keep things fun and interesting. I know that's disappointing for some people, but both myself and Chris have become extremely busy and kind of diverged paths on our work. We still love each other tremendously. We're the bestest of buddies. All is good there, but ultimately we found it very, very difficult to make the time to record the podcast together. It just became very difficult in terms of our lives. So I'm looking to take a step in another direction, and Chris is continuing his direction with Joe Blow, doing tremendous work over there and running the site. So that will continue. So, but want to make sure that you guys are just aware of what's going on. So I will have a new podcast. There will be more stuff for me. There will be more stuff on YouTube. So I just hope that you guys will join me in that endeavor. So as such, make sure to follow me on Twitter if you haven't already, at Arctic Ninja Paul. That's pretty much where I'll put out all my announcements and stuff, as well as subscribing to the Arctic Ninja Network YouTube channel. That is my personal YouTube channel, and we'll be expanding more and more. I've got a couple commentaries coming up and some other videos. I'm actually going to get back to doing some unboxing stuff as well. And I'll do my podcast series, whatever it's going to be, and probably some other videos as well. So I'm looking to kind of, really express my own personal takes and my own personal views on everything there. And I hope that you guys will join me. So, that's where this content will be going up, including this interview. So I want to thank all of you for your support throughout the years for Beard and the Bald. I know Chris feels the same. again, you could continue to find him at Joblo, and you could find me on Twitter, and then, all this other stuff that I've got coming up. But we are honestly just so grateful for all the time that everyone has spent with us. It's been great. Your feedback, your interactions, your support has truly meant the world. And we value all of you that have stuck with us throughout the years. And it's just been great to see everybody pop back up, and it's awesome. So I hope that many of you will join me on my next chapter and continue to support Chris and his. And while we love doing the show, and as two friends talking about movies, it's nothing without our listeners. So again, a heartfelt thanks for spending your time with us, and I hope that you will continue to in our next endeavor. So with that, remember to love what you love, and I'll see you in the next chapter.